Today's episode is brought to you by Domain.com.
Welcome back to the behind the scenes of Real Gone. I'm Seth Worley, and today we're talking about visual effects. We'll just go in narrative order, starting with the screen replacement on the TV in the apartment. Now, most screen replacements can be pretty straightforward, but also surprisingly complex. A lot of people put green on the screen so they can just replace it with a key. I usually like to shoot it with a blank screen, but with enough lighting where I can still get the texture that's on that screen. We chose to shoot the TV with the Flex LED light we got from Lens Pro to Go. We stuck it to the front of the screen so that we created this natural glow and flare around the edges of the screen. We also put green tape around the edges of the screen so I'd be able to tell where the edges were in post. Once I brought the shot into After Effects, I dropped the black solid onto the screen. Then I dropped the old movie on top of that, stretching it from its original 4:3 aspect ratio to the screen's 16:9 ratio, further cementing the depression of the film, because there really is something depressing about watching a standard definition broadcast on a high definition screen. Next, I dropped Holomatrix onto the screen footage to give it a little more digitaliness. This is a really fantastic and powerful plugin that's within Red Giant Universe, as is VHS, an equally fantastic plugin also in Red Giant Universe. I dropped that on next to wash out all the color and give it even more analog-y blandness. These are all words: digitaliness, analog-y, and blandness. I think blandness might actually be one. After that, I needed to add a reflection to the screen. So I actually took a shot from earlier in the scene, our wide master, flipped it horizontally, added some blur, added a 2-color gradient to simulate some glare. Then after fine-tuning the curves, the opacity, and the blend mode, I had my shot. Having that natural glow coming from that LED on the screen really helped sell the look and the effect.
Better make it dead on arrival.
Okay, so later in the hanging scene, when the light pole breaks, we shot a stationary plate of the light just sitting there with no rope attached, because we all know how that went. So in After Effects, I took that plate and I duplicated it several times, so I could cut it up into several controllable layers. One layer would be my clean plate, where I painted out the light pole and everything attached to it. One would be the pole by itself with nothing attached to it, which I cut out using standard masking tools. One would be the light. 2 would be the reinforcement poles holding the light onto the pole. And then 2 would be the wires running from either side of the pole. After adjusting all their anchor points to the right spaces, I spent about half a day manually keyframing and animating the scene until I had something I was really happy with that felt naturalistic. The 2 things that sell the shot for me are the wires. I used the puppet tool to cause those wires to stretch as the pole rocks back and forth. And then the 2 reinforcement poles holding the light onto the pole. Having those snap at slightly separate times after they're stretched and buckled really helps sell the effect visually. Lastly, I added a little dust burst from Video Copilot's Action Essentials 2. For all intents and purposes, it's actually a fairly simple, straightforward effect shot, unlike the shot after it, which was about 5 times more complicated, as you'll see after Ryan pays some bills.
You know, I love me some Domain.com and use them to register all my domains, but now they've got some .club goodness, which got me thinking of some fun stuff that we could do with you guys coming here pretty soon, but we'll talk about that a little later. For now, here's what you should know about .club. .club is universal and understood globally. It is perfect if you're building a new business site or naming your film startup, because if you think about it, any business or new idea really is a club. The internet is all about community, collaboration, which makes .club perfect. Go to domain.com/club to register your .club domain. They're only $9.99 a year, and thousands of great options are still available. And of course, make sure you use the coupon code FilmRiot to save 25%. It'll get you them money savings and let them know that you heard it from us, which helps us keep the show going. So when you think domain names, think domain.com.
So for the final shot of the hanging sequence, we thought it'd be hilarious to obscure most of the action somehow and let most of the comedy play out in the sound, which was mostly Darren screaming. Now we ended up replacing the handwriting on all of the envelope shots. Originally I had written it too small to be readable, so at the very last minute of post-production, Stark actually did me a favor and went in and replaced all the handwriting on all the envelope shots. But enough about Stark, and more about me. We shot 2 plates here. One of Darren acting out his landing with the ladder falling next to him, and then one where Darren just kind of stood on top of the ladder and did awkward motions with his arms. I cut Darren out and animated his fall, transitioning into the second plate once he lands on the ground, so it ultimately looked like one shot. Then I brought in the rope from the previous shot and puppet tooled it in a submission. Then I brought in the light from the previous shot and keyframed it to dip down into frame, ultimately snapping off and falling onto Darren. I once again added some dust to add chaos and natural elements to the mix. And then after some blurring and foreground roto, the shot came together a lot better than I actually thought it would. A lot of what sells it here for me, and as with most visual effects shots, is the sound, which as we said before is mostly Darren screaming. Behind every great visual effects shot is Darren screaming. Moving on to the hospital, one of our favorite gags in the film is when Darren gets out of bed, goes to the window, and jumps out. So once again, we shot 2 plates. One of Darren getting up out of bed and walking out of frame, and then another without the blinds of Darren stepping up onto an apple box and jumping off, making his shadow look as if he were jumping out the window. Now the way I stitched these 2 shots together, I took the blinds and I manually masked out every single blind and then hand keyframed them to not only move up in unison, but to actually compress as they went up. The one prominent thing about window blinds is that they usually piss me off. They usually take at least 2 strong pulls to get the blinds all the way up, so I animated them that way. If you notice, they actually catch once halfway up and at a slight awkward slant and then an awkward tilt before finally going all the way up with a second pull. Now while the blinds are going up, what you don't notice is that I'm actually fading into the second plate where we don't have blinds, where Darren steps up and jumps out. And once again, it's a shot that I had no idea would look as good as it did. In fact, we didn't even know it would work. So after losing his and breaking everything in the hospital, he heads back to his apartment to lose more of his and break all of his stuff in his apartment, ultimately pulling a gun on himself. Now there's actually a visual effect here with the gun, but I'll cover that in a future episode. But as with the rest of his suicide attempts, his plans are foiled, this time by the fire alarm. Now as much as Chris begged me to let him open up the fire alarm and start pulling wires out and breaking things, as great of an idea as that sounds to any human being who hears it, I insisted that he let me light it up in post. You know what I mean? Flares. Our plate was just a locked off shot of the fire alarm doing absolutely nothing. But Sam had an idea to actually point a light at the wall and flash it on and off, which, just like the TV shot, totally helped sell the effect once I added the flare from No Light Factory in post. This moves us into 2 of the biggest visual effects sequences in the entire film, the building fire and the fire engine, both of which I'm going to walk you through in excruciatingly nerdy detail next week. And don't forget, the Real Gone digital download pack is available in the Triune store now. You want it. I want it. I'm buying it. I already have it. I'm buying it again. I'm crazy.